together, uh, there's a really interesting flow that happens that you can see in the diagram right above it. And the flow shows that the traits that come with the different clans that are attached to our core values in the advocates are also attached to certain functions in the actual decision-making process, right? And it shows that the bears and the wolves are the ones that do the deliberating. And just the process that we just described, the turtles sit and observe and validate the deliberations between the wolves and the bears, issues being presented to the floor, initiated by the wolf. This is the role of the turtle to observe and then validate the deliberation, send it back if it's not valid against the core collective's constitution or what the core collective agrees they're all made up of, right? And at a more fundamental level, which from the turtle perspective includes ecosystems, right? And so this is something that Frege asked for way at the beginning of the foundation, 2020 somewhere, that inspired us to even mention indigenous modes in the first place. How are we going to have long-term sustainability for ecosystems built into our ecosystem, our Stacks ecosystem? And so I think the core values that are embedded into the indigenous context of these clans, along with the core values in the Web3 context of these clans, you really start to see how this can achieve long-term balance, long-term sustainability in how folks organize themselves. And then in the diagram right above, let's see, I'll post it again just to make it easier. It's not too far above. There's 2 messages in between. This goes even deeper into the flow of the formal council process, which again is just a formalization of all of the preliminary consensus that's already been had. But there's also a layout here that becomes extremely important for the indigenous context when the folks are physical council together. And the layout is extrapolated right from the cosmology, which is maybe a little bit longer than we have time for, to say the least. But nonetheless, we have things very power, not just on the human realm, but in the ecosystems realm. And a big part of this is seen just in the layout, in the flows because of the layout. You'll notice that the only clans not sitting next to each other when the males and females come together for decision making is the turtle clan, and that there's this line, the direction showing that it's time for deliberation. Right, the wolf clan, male and female, are already sitting next to each other. Right, so deliberation can happen very just in staying where they are in the layout. But this requires the turtles to walk over, right, in the physical context. And what this is much bigger than just logistics, right? This is an indicator of a capacity for consensus, a capacity for coming together on position, right? And it's these are the validators, right? This is the last step in the flow, right? So this shows a fundamental mechanism for balance in decision making, not just between males and females in a scaled, as big as a nation, but also ecosystems, scales large as regional areas and geographies, territories. So here you see an indicator, a marker for what you don't want to lose sight of, right, in the long term. You don't want to have the voices of women drowned out. You don't want to have the general voice of regenerative sustainability drowned out, right? And so this is, I think, one of the deeper fundamental mechanisms for functional autonomy in decision making, streamlining whole nations' voices and then streamlining the autonomy and distributed power for balanced decision making long term. So I'm really excited to get this across to folks here today, and so the message could be passed, right, in terms of what makes us unique, in terms of not just providing lip service for autonomy, but building it in, right, making it felt, tangible in the structures, and the indigenous dialogue that is our precious access to how to do this and not wing it, right? So I'll shut up now. And hopefully this gives a little bit more context to how this tooling can be used. For example, we won't be walking physically across the council fire, but they can have something built into our flows that say, okay, when it's time for the turtles to come together, right, in real time or in asynchronous threads that are happening across different time zones, it's the final part of the flow has to be initiated by the women, and this is not indicated towards anything but the acknowledgement that in the long term, right, we don't have a drowning out of our matrilineal heritage, whether that's the voices of women or the voices of the regenerative soil around us, waters, right, air, right, up to solar systems, right. So this broader regenerative design that we don't want to lose sight of in decision making. It's important for resilience socially, but also resilience ecologically. And this is something that, hopefully Frege sees this recording in some way, somehow, or I can remember to say it this way if we get a chance to. But I'll shut up now and open the floor up for any questions and all of those weeds. Welcome, Katie. I'm just getting back to seeing who's with us. Hopefully you caught us in a good moment.
Not really. I caught the tail end of that, but I'm here to learn.
Beautiful, beautiful. Welcome. It is recorded, so hopefully it'll make some sense some way, somehow. But
yeah, as for the recording, the beginning of this talk too has some demos too, just like heads up. I put it in the meeting notes so people would know that those would be there. It's demos of the consensus flow. I'm not sure if MicroDAOs was gone over yet, but yeah, just wanted to make a note of that for folks present.
Maybe I'll help Kaylee to give her like a sneak peek, because I always try to paraphrase and simplify this kind of stuff. So Kaylee, to my best of knowledge and understanding, so this is like a new way of what Harold is bringing up is like a new way of almost like having in the modern sense, like a government structure of bringing up an issue in the parliament kind of thing, and then you kind of talk a lot, discuss a lot, and stuff like that, and then you kind of vote. But it's more about the discussion than the later the vote itself, almost, from my understanding. But yeah, essentially some sort of way to have key important issues such as money or elected officials, I don't know, whatever, important stuff. Then you use this new governance consensus, come to agreement type of thing.
Gotcha. Okay.
But there's a lot more to this, so don't listen to me. I'm just being a simple guy and try to summarize it. But what Harold, this is all like very heavily researched, and Haas and Ryder and Merrick, they basically know all the stuff, and I just simplify them and talk to people like a normie. That's what my little side gig. but essentially, yes, it's there's a lot more research about this. It's a whole like a rabbit hole to dig in.
Yeah. Okay.
How did I do, guys?
It's fine, man. It's beautiful. Thank you kindly. These are some of the things that I'd forget to juxtapose it next to, and it probably is the first thing that, folks should get introduced to try to contextualize what's going on here, so it's not all completely abstract. But there are some nuances there, right, that make this very unique to what is needed and distinct from what is often needed in the language, at least in analogy, minimally, so folks can make sense of it all. And it very much is just this decision making, right? And one of the things that we touched on, right, in some of the time, hour and a half before you came in here, that this is all dissent and consensus-based decision making as opposed to majority vote. And with the references to parliament or references to other forms of so-called democratic structures, you do get a feel for what were these original protocols. A lot of times where federalism, where structures for so-called democracy came from, right? Not a lot of times, but historically, this is the indigenous context that inspired some of these first concepts, and they were diluted in a lot of ways. One of those ways is having elected officials or even a capacity to campaign. Because in these indigenous structures, there's a motif, a slogan almost, right? That you can't even have a perception of corruption, right? The titles can't be corrupted at all, right? Because the collective is directly empowered to remove that title if the person is ever corrupted, right? So the title can never be corrupted. And people are only selected, never elected, just because of the perception of corruption of campaigning. Right? Why would you want that much responsibility over a collective as big as a nation, right? So a whole lot of responsibility to opt into. And you should probably sit down and sleep on it first, if you do get selected by the collective through consensus. But instead of majority vote, we'll have dissent in all of our tooling and our models that go along with the tooling. And this is so that we have a chance to come to consensus. And one of the fundamental ways that the protocols were diluted with what some of our modern notions of so-called democratic structures that we're familiar with don't work too well, right? And we're getting into the mechanisms of why together, learning through this indigenous dialogue together in this research and development, and building it right into the tooling. So it's been fascinating. Fred, I see you unmuted, or maybe you wanted to this time. I don't know. But,
no, this is intentional. Well, I also just wanted to say like that. I know a huge focus, at least in the Longhouse dialogue, is re-establishing the mother and women's voices in the decision-making process. If we're going to compare it to the democratic structures that we were kind of born into, these didn't really have room for female voices at all. They're most of the time rooms full of men, and maybe a majority of the time there was no input from women. So I think that's a huge emphasis that is placed in what you're laying out is an intentional focus on both the male and female perspectives on the decision-making process.
No, for sure, and I think it even goes even deeper in a lot of ways, right? This concept of mother, or regenerative, or sustainable, right? Having this built in into the mechanisms of the structures that are functional is a huge thing. That even if we've had discussions with advocates that Robert's rule of law or other domestic international law can make the structures that you're working in, even if it's an all-female thing, organization or business, right, whatever, can make the overall structures male, right? Extractive, scarcity-based, competition-based models, right? This is, not regenerative, right? It's extractive, right? So male and female and beyond the human realm sense, or in these more abstract conceptual principle senses, I think is really what these indigenous modes are pointing us in the direction of as well, right? Along with, of course, balance and distributed power between men and women, right? But I think that's more of a given in those contexts, with much different worlds than we live in. And what they're really focused on is evolving ecosystems around them, not taking credit for it, right? But a lot of the food groups that we take for granted, or whole landscapes that we take for granted, were very intentionally modified or not modified by these type of built-in structures for decision making. Yeah, thank you, Colin, for taking note of that and having us reiterate some of that.
Yeah, because I think especially like in these crypto spaces, you have a lot of people who, both male and female, but mostly women, I think, are probably almost traumatized from the corporate world of business, where they feel like they have no voice or ability to speak up on certain issues. And so I think like the intentional, intentionally trying to empower them to make them feel like their voices matter and they actually do have valuable input and information is really important, especially as we try to transition into like this crypto space without bringing along the trauma that comes from this corporate world. That a lot of these people are kind of just, it's almost like people are siphoning in from the corporate world into this crypto space. So it's really easy for us to just fall right back into those same forms of dialogue. And yeah.
Thank you, Colin. Yeah, it's interesting too, right? Exactly how do you build this in any other way is very interesting to me, right? The streamlining of autonomy, right? Thinking of that, you can't have genuine dialogue if there's interference, right? Whether it's female and male interference or male and female interference, because then when we come to the table, how do we know we're having genuine, peaceful dialogue, right? And this is one of the notions at the nation scale in terms of diplomacy and authentic diplomacy, right? If there's espionage, as we come to the table, are we really coming to the table, or is there something else going on here? Is it really diplomacy, right? And so I think this is part of the real function of autonomy in bottom-up horizontal systems, right? The access to commons as opposed to this foundation of scarcity. Right, there's this function of autonomy and access to abundant, regenerative abundance, right? And this is a huge paradigm shift for DAO-like structures or for any corporate setting, as you mentioned. And, other things that you mentioned as well, there's this language from the Longs around ensuring that you're creating a space, that you have a space for the Women's Council Fire. Right? This is a fundamental mechanism for long-term sustainability, is this acknowledgement of the sequencing, right, of regeneration, right, is what begets everything in a sense, right? So if you miss that step or you put something else before that step, right, your sequencing is off, right? Your long-term sustainability is likely off as well. I'll shut up there. But I know we spoke a lot just in the recent minutes, but I know we also left off on looking at some of those flow charts and trying to imagine what they look like along with the tooling. I don't know how much of that you got, but I think we touched on some of this quite a bit in terms of the differences in the way that the tooling looks with and without the models. But I want to open the floor for folks like Andrej or others who, there's a lot of new stuff hitting you over the head, I'm sure, in combination with the tooling now. So
is it Andrej? Andrej? I heard you say it to me before.
Yes, it's Andrej.
Andrej.
Yeah, you're right.
Andrej.
Yeah.
So that nobody is confused.
Yeah, it is pretty difficult to pronounce, but you're doing very well. Thank you, Harold, and for explanation of the model. I think for me, this is pretty new, but it was very clear. Maybe one question I still have in mind, but probably I'll figure out as we go through that, is like as a advocate, before I even report something as an issue, like what should be like the best source for me to think if it's like a relevant issue. Like I'm having some like a community here in Poland, which is my YouTube audience, and probably that we are talking in the comments that they sometimes have some suggestions, and I can probably treat this also as like something, if I think it's relevant to be reported as an issue, then probably I should first go into the open discussion, and if that appears to be like a good subject for an issue, then it goes to the issue channel, right?
Exactly.
Go ahead. I'll just mention this. If you don't know if this is an issue or not, just mention me in open discussion.
Okay.
Just mention me, and I think you can even like mention anybody, any friend that you have in the IPX community. Like, hey, help me. That's basically.
Yeah, sure thing. Beautiful.
I'm a writer, and you can mention me anytime if you need help with something. And I don't know if I can help you, but I'll try to find somebody who can help or advocate for you. Just hi.
And whatever comes out of that help from other Haas, Rada, or anybody that sees your post in open discussion or any other channels where you might feel where it's relevant. We'll see folks gathering around that in the same way you see folks gathering around in the YouTube channel, right? This is the indicator, right, that there's a gathering of minds around an issue, that issue should be picked up. And so I think it was a perfect example, the comment section example. But thank you, Connie. Thank you, Connie, for noting that this was somehow clear. This is very encouraging, to say the least. Means a lot. Thank you. But yeah, we'll continue to leave the floor open.
I'll try. Go ahead. I'll just say that I'll try to put Harold's words as hard and concrete as possible. Those most topic.
Go ahead. Hopefully you're not speaking and we just can't hear you.
Oh no, I just want to make a comment that I think it's great having Kaylee here, because like now we have an extra woman in the room, and it comes a good time when Harold was talking about the female representation, and Kaylee has an interest, it seems, this kind of stuff, and it's great that we have more women in the room.
Oh, thank you, guys. Yeah,
because we really just had Ryder before, I think. I don't know who else were active or interested in this kind of, and Juliet. But like community sort of level, I guess, like kind of, yeah, I think you'll be a great.
Wait, I want to hear what Kaylee had to say.
Yeah.
Sorry, my screaming went crazy. I'm sorry. I'm trying to figure out how to fix this. But no, I was just saying thank you. Like I appreciate it. I've actually been seeking a community where I can talk about these things specifically because there's not a lot of places where you can do that. So it's appreciated, and I'm glad to be with you guys. So thank you.
No, thank you, Connie. Thank you, Connie, Hero, and Kaylee. Yeah, this is exciting in a lot of ways. I think you're right. Yeah, we're pretty much like every other Web3 community where it can get pretty sparse in terms of some of our meetings, at least. But I would have to say though, we have a lot of exciting female leaders that are real catalysts, to say the least, of the Stacks ecosystem, from Shannon to Jenny to Gina to all over the place. This is an exciting network to bring these type of protocols to, right, and to make sure that this type of space is felt. We'll open it up as well. Hero, if you have anything else, I see.
No, just adding on to that female part. I think like if they can, I think there was some idea around before, like if they, Kaylee said she had no sort of other obvious place to come together. Like I think could be, if they want, they should maybe via some of the tooling here or opportunities within Stacks Advocate, maybe they can arrange some sort of women's club or whatever, and they can meet, with different community level members who are female, or maybe you want to add like a Shannon into the mix just to get more like different, I don't know, different entity, different perspective in there, or from the official, but the foundation level or a community level, purely community level. I just think it's cool if they can have some sort of more direct forum to get together every now and then, and
For sure.
and then I just think it will make the women's network in Stacks more resilient. I don't know, just a thought about that, and it comes back to then they have a greater representation within Stacks, whether they use the consensus stuff here, the formal consensus stuff here or not. If they do come together and they use this consensus flow, that's like a win-win. If they don't use a consensus flow, but they just get together via the opportunities of, maybe providing some funds for them to get together online or whatever, little bit of incentive for them to get together, just to kickstart it, I think could be that's what was on my mind.
We could get together in person. Just like I'm like, I want a pizza party, It's just cool to think about that. Like that'd just be cool. I wish I could just like.
Do you know what? Funny thing is, you say that it's not unrealistic in Megapond.
No.
In Megapond, right? Mark said to us, if we want, apes can apply for little grants of money, and if they are in the same location, they can get together using Megapond's money, because Megapond is like quite big and they have a little bit of treasury, and they are encouraging people to get together. Like, if they're all in one location, and they will give them some money. I don't think anybody has done it yet, but I think Mark has expressed that it is possible. And a little bit back to what we were talking about. Sorry, not back to what we're talking about, but back to what I.
Merc.
What? What? Do you know?
Merc,
Okay. I don't get it, but okay.
not Mark. Merc.
Oh, okay, Merc. Okay, okay. Yeah, Merc. Fine, Merc. But you know, those if in Megapon people are meeting up, it's also sort of adding the resiliency to the relationship, and it goes back to my thinking of the onboarding mechanism of getting people get together. You know, it's those little bit more than just text-based Discord relationship. It's maybe having some voice connected, or maybe some human-to-human connection. Um, so yeah, I don't know. Just to put it out there, I think it's all for me. It's all sort of interconnected to the point I like to add is to add that human touch. I think could be cool.
Sure, for sure. And no, we'd love to see stuff like that organically, of course, sprout up. And I don't think there's anything wrong with highlighting that it could be a thing, or pointing out paths or to where it can happen. And then letting the ideas take root. Be exciting to see what happens. And you mentioned the use of the consensus flow. And one thing that's very exciting too about what's happening already in terms of folks using what is the modification of some of this tooling in terms of journeys that allow for micro DAOs and the creation of funding proposals and all of this Clarity smart contract work going into it from Haas's side. It also dovetails nicely with all of this, people have started to replicate the use of this tooling in their own servers or in their own communities. And this is all open source and part of the convictions of the GovLab collectively, the whole ecosystem, right? Hopefully, one of the core values, right? And so this can be replicated if there's anything felt here, and not just in sessions like this or the get-togethers that you're referencing, but felt in decision-making access. In the tooling, right? Felt in the modeling that goes along with the tooling in terms of the space, that Kaylee alluded to and that yourself here are alluding to, right? This is something that can be replicated, as a Longhouse might say, right? Folks can start their own nations, right? Because there's something very interesting about what we're talking about here, right? As governance is important across the board in Web3, right? So important across the board in general, right? What might be better termed in the indigenous context, matrilineal management, right? Is something that is a beautiful thing to just be able to plug and play, because now all of a sudden all these ambitious ideas, projects, right, that might seem grandiose or might feel like they have scaling problems otherwise, and will likely, right, fall into certain bases of attraction of extraction, certain bases of attraction towards drowning out the voices of women in long-term ecosystems, labor, right, extraction, all of these things are likely to happen if governance isn't seriously thought about. And to be able to plug and play with models and tooling that is seriously thought about this and comes from, has a whole lot of precedence, to say the least, in terms of indigenous context, and dialogue comes along with that plug and play as well. Because we're all still learning this, right? It's not, plug and play and don't keep the dialogue. It's a powerful thing on many, many levels, particularly when it comes to just plain old indigenous dialogue and the actual capacities for it. One of the reasons why we weren't all born into these structures automatically, the way we were born into the diluted versions of these structures, because there wasn't a capacity for female voices in the exchange of these protocols, right? And so, we have a very unique opportunity to still make the transformative power that was supposed to be what was, impacted settler colonialism here. It can still impact settler colonialism here and the systems therein, with this type of the capacities for dialogue now, right? Because Now, if you think about it, that dialogue is still hard, right? If we wanted to have indigenous dialogue, right, do we have any examples for autonomous decision-making processes for the women in our organizations, corporations, families, right? Or will we make a similar mistake that the so-called founding fathers made when sitting on these 201 pump councils, right? Just by default of not knowing how to have autonomous decision-making processes for women ecosystems, so on and so forth. So how do we ensure that there's not extraction, right, for ecosystems' voices, right? And so that's what I mean by capacity for indigenous dialogue, because sometimes there can just be more than language barriers. There's cultural barriers, right? And so this is huge in this way, right? Yeah.
Do you feel like you're going to want to break before another meeting just like this in 8 minutes? There's supposed to be like 3 or 4 people who couldn't make other times that can make 3 p.m. That if we're trying to, make that call, might be nice to have a little break in between.
Actually, I was actually not aware of the next meeting, so thank you for the heads up. And I could probably use that break along with some of y'all from hearing my voice.
Yeah, it was like an automated event from that Lettuce Meet, but I included it too, just because basically with all the people's different, schedules, it was like 2, 3, 4 events to try and kind of get everybody who responded. So. Just out of respect for the folks who follow up with their calendars and stuff. Of course, if you can't make it, that's that you can't make it. But it's on there. So we got like Jay Ryan and Frieger and Gottfried and Algorithm and just a bunch of folks that might show up. Just want to give you a heads up.
And we're going over similar things, right, as the first session?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Actually, hopefully, as close to the first session as possible without Haas, unfortunately. But maybe we can do it justice, hopefully.
I'd be happy to go through the consensus flow or something. But why don't we just take a break right now? Sorry to interrupt, because talking about extraction, this is the kind of I never really want to interrupt, but sometimes I want to just build resilience into these long dialogues. And see how we can be inclusive of new folks and stuff. So let's take a break. People can stay on, or they can sign off and come back on, and then hopefully more folks will come. Between 3:15 or something like people do when they just kind of filter in.
3, okay, yeah, beautiful.
I just imagine, people tend to do that, it says 3, but yeah.
but I'll stay here, and, we can allow folks to file in, so they know that at least it'll look like something's happening, at least a few of us stay. But and Kayla, if you do have the time, it would be a good time to catch up without having to watch the recording and, be able to interrupt yourself if you have any questions, but no pressure to stay for anybody. Thank you kind of for all the time already. I think, how much time? 2 hours, is it? 2 hours. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Andre. Yeah, have a good day. Beautiful. Hope to see you soon.
Yeah, you too. Bye-bye.
Have a good day. I think he had a really good session. The statement was clear.
Is there going to be a break in the recording? Who's recording today?
It's Hero, if I'm not mistaken.
Hero, what kind of megacom did you get?
I'm recording. Hold on. Just get the logistics. Okay, just give me a sec.